before we get started on this, I do have a side question. Lawrence, I had heard many times that the concept of hell, the modern concept of hell, did not yet exist in alleged Jesus time. So I gave you a Bible reference, Matthew 18. Can you give me the background as where this hell concept comes from, and then we'll get started on the show.
Okay, yeah, sure. So there were already kind of ideas of this after death, like lake of fire stuff. There are a couple references in the Dead Sea Scrolls for it, but it wasn't like super dominant or anything. Because in Judaism, right, even now, like there's not really like a hell concept in the same way as there is in Christianity. uh, so when we get to the intertestamental period, so that's the period of time from the writing of the book of Daniel to the beginning of the writings of the New Testament. During that time period, we see a lot of developments in this because, kind of like how the first period ended, uh, it used a lot of fire purification imagery, and that was later taken to be like, a kind of like a literal place where this was happening. And eventually it made its way to, to the early Christian circles, what we would call the early Christian circles. And it wasn't super detailed, right? Because now I'm sure everyone has heard like there are different layers of hells, right? There are different people in these hells suffering different punishments. There are remnants of an idea like this in, or maybe just the early buddings of an idea like this in First Enoch, for example, and which is a text that would predate it's from the intertestamental period. So there are some ideas about these different sections that souls go to, but it's not. And while some of them are described as being punishment, it's not super clear, and it kind of develops over time. And even in the New Testament, it's not super well thought out. It's just kind of developed into this lake of fire after death imagery. But then even later on, with the apocalypse of Peter and the apocalypse of Paul, you get a much more detailed view of hell, and that's actually, those texts are actually what Dante is pulling from to
Yes.
go his
I've
circles of
mentioned
hell.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just, with the fire as purification imagery, that did call another scripture to mind. No, I don't remember the reference. I just memorized all the text. But it was about those who, would be rewarded in heaven, basically, of the believers, and those who did not, do these things, they would still escape as one passing through the fire. So there was an imagery, a combining of the imagery of, the refiner's fire burning away the impurities, but you yourself would still be saved, but you wouldn't have anything additional to show for it. Or also, if you're running out of your house and your, clothes are on fire, you throw them off and you don't make anything out but yourself, but you're still alive. So either way, those could be taken. But the imagery of the refiner's fire definitely is something you see pop up periodically in the writings too. And that may have been the origin of the concept of a purgatory, where, the impurities would be burned away, metaphorically or literally, very unpleasantly either way. But then you yourself would ultimately go and be with God and be saved. Huzzah. He only tortured you for however long.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I mean, it was my initial impression was that Jesus was saying, and much like Islam teaches, that it's not a supernatural rebirth; it's that your physical body would go on living some way, just in the sky or whatever.
The concept of a resurrection at end of days was definitely a thing, but that was a thing in Judaism with the Pharisees, not the Sadducees. They didn't believe in that, but the various groups did believe in a physical resurrection at the end of days. And I mean, you guys have talked about it with the more crazy stuff, Tomer, you brought with the corpses underground rolling in tunnels to all resurrect in the promised land.
But
which,
that's where the whole. I think it's actually in Matthew as well, right, where the corpses get out of the ground, right, of the holy ones.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
Matthew always does the weirdest shit.
Yeah. So he also maintains that that idea of this big resurrection, right? Because you're supposed to essentially, like, Earth has to be like made anew. Basically, it has to be suitable for all the holy ones. In fact, even in Revelation, you get this idea of a new heaven and a new Earth. Except the one big difference is that in Revelation, there's specifically not going to be a new temple. That's
Right.
They're very explicit about it. So
Not just
Because the
that, but the
Lord is
temple that there is prior to the end is like that replica. That's
right, yeah,
it's
because it's all going to
okay.
become, once God takes over Earth, that's it. Like that, the whole place is essentially going to be a temple. You don't need the temple.
God is everywhere, and yeah, we all live in a giant glowing golden cube, which is the New Jerusalem. Huzzah! Yeah, but it's we'll get to Revelation. It's going to be so much fun. I am
Yeah.
so looking forward to
So we've
that.
got a comment.
Yeah.
Matt White says, Lawrence, regarding hell burning, was this the pit where execution victim corpses got burned?
So
Yeah.
so I don't know if he's referring to the valley of Ben Hinnom. That is, yeah, Gehenna.
Gehenna, yeah.
So the that would have been, there is still some debate over it, but may have been like a place where there was, at one point, human sacrifice or something like that. We do have examples of what's his name, King Jeroboam, I think. His sons are passed through the fires of Gehenna, and that is a real place. It is a real valley. However, I don't know if the Matt was referring to the like the pits that I was talking about in First Enoch. Those would be different. They were 4 distinct ones. So I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to.
But
there.
the Gehenna imagery did definitely,
or if he's talking about like an actual pit where there were execution victims. I am not sure about that.
Was there a difference between hell and Gehenna? Because
Yes.
the Christians who bring this up to me insist that they are one and the same.
No, the thing is, later terminology, it would be an etymological, like the thing is, initially they would have been different, right? One concept would have evolved into the other.
At one point, the Valley of Gehenna was where, like, the
Gehenna, it's the sort
Gehenna,
of punishment before.
Yeah, but at one
There's no,
point,
it's
I
not like
believe
an eternal punishment.
there was a
but
place where, like,
yeah.
the off scourings, the offal, the gross bits of the sacrifices and slaughtered animals and stuff would be burned up, and you'd had just a refuse bin, and that you talk about where the worm is undying and the fire is unquenched, and you sort of gross burn off waste stuff going on, which I could totally see them doing that to desecrate a place where previously offerings have been given to other gods or whatever. I don't know, that's just speculation, but definitely in character. But that imagery then repeated and brought into this other concept, and then people took it literally, and then we have
I don't know exactly.
There is another aspect to the whole purification by fire that's not just the eradicating of garbage, but it's also from metallurgy. In the whole purification of gold, for example, how like the impurities come up to the surface, and that's how the metal workers or whoever was processing gold would know this is how you purify it. And I think that imagery got also placed on top of that other imagery.
Liquid metal, lake of fire, that's kind of the only thing that's like it in reality.
Eventually it became less about purifying the soul in any way, and then became much more about redemption of sins, right? Or like you getting what you finally deserve, right? And much more about it became much more literal physical pain, suffering. So you kind of have that transition. It took many years.
It's a
There's a lot
double-edged
of
sword.
the fetishization of suffering, though, in Christianity that I think comes from the idea that the suffering will purify the good in you
Mhm.
that God has put into you, like the purifying fire of the refiner's fire, as I mentioned, as Mark mentioned, of the metallurgy and all that. And so that was a really, I mean, I know it was it's sort of one of those things that was probably initially intended well for people who were suffering in situations that there really was no escape from, and so you could, you know, encourage and elevate them in this way, but then it later turned into basically just a way to stop people from protesting against abuse and fighting for their own well-being and rights, and to keep them downtrodden and, you know, complicit in their own oppression of, oh, this suffering will refine you, you're in God's eyes, and it'll make you better, and, you know, it's sacred. Suffering is sacred. You should
Mhm.
desire to suffer. And I cannot count the number of Christians I have met in that desiring to suffer category.
Mm.
Some purely for the drama, but some quite deeply and sincerely believing it to be good for their souls. And that's
Yeah,
not a
okay.
healthy mindset. Does not end well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think maybe it started off as like an explanation for the question of, you know, why do bad things happen to good people?
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, you know, well, they get bad things happening to them so that God doesn't have to punish their soul in hell.
Mhm.
You know, that's like much worse for them. Like a bit of
Well, and
physical
we've all met people
punishment.
who've been
Yeah.
through something really terrible and have emerged a better person, who've used that suffering to
Mm.
build themselves up. And of course, if you're a Christian, you're not allowed to take any credit for anything good you do. It's all God. So God obviously made you a better person.
Yeah, he's giving
By
you
torturing
because you're
you.
good. Because you're good,
Yeah.
you're getting a second chance. But the truly evil, they get the pleasure in this world, but you know, they're gonna
Well,
get their
and
comeuppance back
suffering
in
can
the end.
break people
Yeah.
too.